Okay, time to put the meter cord back in place. This is the last time you get to see the film advance, so if you haven't already put a touch of grease here, now's the time to do it. Also make sure that all your screws are tight because they're going to be buried and you're not going to get them again. So where do we start? Well, we start with putting in the shutter release and the film release because they have to go in before you put the meter in place. I usually use some molybdenum paste. Just run it through there. This is the shutter release. It has the shorter of the two screws. Just give that shaft a bit of a wipe. There's a notch in here where it rubs on the back of this post. I'll just give that a touch of molybdenum paste too. It sits down there like that. You could use synthetic grease, you could use graphite grease, you can use whatever you've got. I'll just give that a wipe through there. That sits on there like that. The meter just sits on here. Little tab on the back corner there, hooks under the piece here on the strap plug. You have to push these down so you can seat the meter, and the meter's seated in place, and we can think about putting the cord on. Okay, so here I've got a length of cord. It's not the original cord. That was broken in this particular case. So I'll just feed that up through the hole in the casting. I've got a piece of wire here somewhere to help me fish that up. There it is. This very fine piece of wire used to be one of those twist ties that you can't get anymore. Just pull that up through there. Yeah, how does this go? Alright, we'll start here. Go between the tiny double pulley here, wrap it round the back past that tiny pulley again, wrap it round the back. If you've got your original cord still, you won't have this much trouble. This is synthetic, it's got a mind of its own. This is some sort of fishing line, might have been Kevlar. Okay, I'll just pull those loops down, get a bit of tension on them. So, let's see what we've got here. This one that came from the back of the drum, that goes to the top pulley here. It goes to the inside pulley here. See, make sure I get this cord all wrapped around here neatly. The diagram for how this stuff is laid out is clearly visible in the 3S service manual, and you can download that from my website. If I remember, I'll put a link in the video description. Okay, so I'm just looking at that now to see what I've got and make sure that all my cord is running in the correct places. That looks good. I'll just take that loop and get it sitting in its groove properly. It's not sitting underneath there correctly. Just use a toothpick to prod that into place. That's better. Okay, well, that looks quite good. Now I need to be able to hold this here in some fashion so that I don't lose the tension on that while I'm trying to fight it around the other positions. The easiest way to do this is to use 2 washers and a screw. That hole in that post is threaded for just this purpose. Here I will take the cord from the front position and keep it on this side. I'll take the cord from the rear position here, the lower position as we see it sitting on the table, and put that in there. I'll get those pieces of cord trapped between the washers and then just lightly do up that screw. If you overdo it, you'll cut the cord and then you're going to wish you hadn't done that. Alright, so far so good. I'll just stand this up and check that the cord's going correctly around the back of that drum. Where you can see it's not sitting in the groove there properly, so I'll just get that sitting in place. That looks good. Now I'll tip the camera back down and get the cord in place further down. Here's the drum that we need to connect the cord up to. I'll take some synthetic grease, run it through the centre to lubricate that drum. That's going to sit right on here. So the cord, I'll just unhook this spring. Oh, that's okay, it's unhooked. Now the cord takes the same alignment down here as it will do there. So the cord from the front pulley at this point comes down to the front pulley at this point. It then goes to the bottom of this pulley here, this wheel. Likewise, this one from the rear pulley runs to the rear pulley here, and it runs to the top of this drum. And now all I've got to do is wiggle this stuff into place. I usually start with the front pulley. Take my drum. Get the cord started. And run it round this way. Check that I've got about the right tension there to match what I've got. Yeah, that looks good. The other piece, the one from the back, starts in the opposite side and loops around the other way. Alright, I'm going to tangle already. What have I got here? I've got everything in a great twist. It's no use to me. Right, so I've got it good to there. Just checking I've got everything in the right place. Front goes to the bottom. I've got a twist in this somehow. Okay. Check my placement. I seem to have managed to get these reversed in some fashion. How have I done that? Right, this is the front one. Runs to the bottom of this drum. This is the rear one, runs to the top of the drum. I'm off the pulleys at the top now, so the screw cord there's shifted. Stop and regroup. That's the front, this one's the rear. I'm just checking to see how much wind I need on that. Okay, that's pretty good. Lift that off carefully. Take the other cord, run that round the drum. And drop that onto the pulley. Just checking that the cord runs round the pulleys, it's nowhere funny. And get the spring on here to tension this. If I bring that loop round, I should be able to do it. That's it, and now it's under tension. Take the screw out here. It's clamping my cord. Now I need to check that the cord runs neatly over the pulleys. So the cord runs neatly over the pulleys, it's divided nicely there, it's not running on the same pulley. On this pulley we see much the same thing. Both of these cords are running on the same pulley at this point. I need to make sure that this one is running on the back pulley. So if I take some tension off the pulley here, I can probably prod that cord down. That's it, it's dropped into position. It's making sure that the meter is seated. And I'm just going to roll this drum backwards and forwards to make sure the cord moves smoothly. I'll prod that cord down so that the end of the cord is against the back of that pulley. It'll just help the cord to wind up smoother if it's not running over itself. Alright, that looks pretty good. So the position we want this, I'll get this in place here so we can see. So the cord at the bottom of this drum comes in under here, and the knot is in this slot at this position. So it's like a 3/4 of a turn. The front cord, the one that runs to the bottom of the drum. And all the other cords wound up on the other one. From experience, I can tell you that for this to be in the correct place when we put everything back together, this cord's not tied to the drum at all at the moment, it's just wrapped around it. This dial will be sitting in very much roughly that position. The ASA scale and the DIN scale there running along the line of the camera. I know from experience that'll be about the right spot. We won't set the cord into this drum until the front's on and everything's assembled. But that's how you get the cord in place on a camera like this. And this is the style of tensioner that you're most likely to strike with these cameras. There were two other styles that were used on earlier cameras. This is the most common type, so I started with this. The cord I've used here, as I said earlier, is some fishing line I got from somewhere. It's exceptionally tough. It's a little bit thicker than the original, but it works marvellously well. And the length, if you're cutting your own cord, is 18¼ inches between the knots, which I've marked down as 464 millimeters. This is the style of tensioner that's on camera number 1. The earliest models all had this style of tensioner. It's entirely manual. To slacken it off, slacken off the screw, slide this up to the top, tighten the screw back up. There's a hole in the front of the shutter plate so that you can get in and make an adjustment to that after everything's assembled. The disadvantage of having a system like this is that you set the tension, you've got no control over it after that. Basically, if it's nice and snug, that's all good. If you get a bit of slack in the cable, then you'll end up with backlash in your meter system, and that the meter will fail to respond adequately to fine movements of the setting wheel, which of course is changing your aperture and shutter speed. So the spring-loaded tensioners have got the advantage there. They were certainly an improvement. But this is what we've got for the earliest camera. So now I'll put the meter on the top of this and basically do the same thing again, except in this case I'm using an original cord, which was very likely silk. They're exceptionally tough. I don't think they fail much by themselves without a bit of assistance. Most of them you can put down the failure to the fact that someone's had the front rings off the camera, put them back in the wrong place, turned the wheel until it got to the end of the cord, and then everything goes bang. Alright, so got my pieces for this camera. Just a wipe and molybdenum paste there. A little bit on the shutter release shaft, a little bit on that tab where it's going to run on the back of this arm. That gets the shorter of the two springs. Here's the film release button. I'm giving that a wipe. That has the longer of the two springs rather. Just check that everything's tight. Gives it a last little bit of lubrication. That's probably a bit generous. Put my meter in place. The springs on these two things tend to push the meter up out of position. That's just normal. You've just got to work around it. Right, so I'm taking my cord. I'll fish my piece of wire down here. Pull the cord back up. And start getting it in position. This will be easier to get in position because it's a finer cord. And it doesn't quite have as much of a mind of its own as the other one. It's looking good. I'll just look around this, make sure that the cord's not sitting in anywhere doing anything funny. Okay, and I'll put my washers and screws in there and clamp that down. I'll do the same again. I will take the back cord over to that side and the front one to this side. See if I can get them under the washer. Nip those screws up lightly because you don't want to cut that thread. Okay, let's see what we've got. That looks pretty good. Here's our drum. The drum's black, chemically blackened, but it's just brass. They did that with the early cameras. They stopped doing that afterwards. It's anyone's guess why. It's going to sit on there like that. This is our front, and this is the rear one. And see if I can get this together. About that much. It's just about textbook, that one. cord, back over the drum. Right, that one. Let's see if I can get this wrapped correctly. Okay, just checking to see, make sure I've got things around the right way. It appears that I have. So I'll slacken this off, pull that down and apply a little bit of tension to it and tighten the screw again. I'll remove the screw and washers from the top. I'm checking my cord run, making sure that front goes to front and so forth. That's looking pretty promising. Okay, so I'll check my cord run around this drum now, make sure that that's moving smoothly. Looking pretty good. I'll get this meter at the top here positioned where it should be, which is going to be something like that when I've got this correctly positioned. With the cable correctly positioned at the base of the camera, the drum at the top should be positioned something like that. As before, this isn't tied to the drum yet. We've got to tie it into the drum later once the front's on the camera and everything's in place. Alright, so with my screw and washer removed from here, I'm going to give this a little bit more tension at this point. I'll just slacken that screw off, push down on the pulley and bracket and tighten the screw back up. And check that the cord moves smoothly, and I'm looking to see that the cord stays taut, that I'm not seeing a loose spot as the tension's taken on one side and the other side goes slack. I think I can probably get a bit more tension on that. That feels good. So that's the cord in place on the early camera with the manual adjustment for the cord tension there. And as I said earlier, the run for the cord, how it goes around the drums, is all in the service manual. If everything was simple, those would be the only two variants we needed to be concerned with. But it's not that simple. Here's another one. Apply some grease here. Check that that's tight. Same again for the shutter release. shutter release has the shorter of the two springs. That sounded a bit rough going down there, didn't it? That's a bit better. The film release button has the longer spring. Our meter just sits on the top. The tab on the end of the meter hooks under that end bracket, and the meter should seat. That's it. Same deal again, we've got to fish the cord through. This one is another original cord which didn't in fact come off this camera. It's come from one of my spares. I'll get this cord around the drum. Okay, I'll just check that that cord is running correctly around the drum. And that it's not overlapping anywhere it shouldn't be. That all looks good. Checking that I've got the cord that runs around this way runs to the front, and the cord that runs round that way runs to the rear pulley. That all looks good. I'll use my washers and screw again. Whatever you're using for washers, make sure that they don't have sharp edges on them. Often washers are made by punching them out of sheet metal. As a result, they often have a nicely rounded edge on one face and a sharp edge on the other. See to it that you keep the rounded face towards the cord, not the sharp face, otherwise you're in danger of cutting it. If you are hunting for cord or meters, Retina Reflex S camera is identical with the cord and meter system, and they are typically cheaper and easier to find than a Retina IIIS rangefinder camera, and so they make a marvellous parts source. Okay, that looks good. And now I've just got to get my cord round the drum at the bottom. Now here we have a different tensioner. This tensioner has a spring here. You can see that it slides up and down for the tension. Basically it's the same bracket as we've seen previously, except it's got a little tab here to catch a spring. And this, instead of having a screw here, well, it is a screw, but it's got a big washer face there and a little recess around this head so that it'll catch the spring. So this one, probably going to have to, I'm not sure how I want to deal with that. I may block it up in that position and then remove the block to put the tension back in place. I think in practice it'll be easy to unhook that spring and put it back when I'm done. There are two loops on this spring, one's larger than the other. The larger loop goes over the screw head, the smallest loop goes over that little formed hook on here. Anyway, that frees that pulley up so that we can get the cord in place. That goes to the rear pulley. This goes to the front pulley. And now I've got to find the drum. Now the drum here is black and brass, just like the earlier camera. This is a comparatively early model, but not as early. I'll put a bit of synthetic grease through there. Wind my cord into the front position. About that much looks good. And the cord, starting in from the opposite slot, runs in the other direction. Checking my cord run, making sure I've got things where I want them to be. That's my front cord there. The rear cord here is sitting tucked underneath it. That's better. The cord's coming off the drum at the back here. No, I've got them tangled up. It's very easy to get the cord tied round the gear on the front of the drum, or catches on one of those edges, and if that happens it all turns to custard. It's the front position here. It's going to go on like that. I'll get the other one tied in place. Now I can tell that's fallen down behind that drum. Now here I've got the cord tangled around the drum at this point. Got to get that off there because that's in danger of snapping. I'm just checking the cord. It doesn't look like anything's tangled over anything else. I think that'll be okay. I'll take my screws and washers out from here. And I'll fit the tensioning spring in place. Check that the meter's seated correctly, and I'll check that the cord moves smoothly. I'll go from one extreme to the other. My meter's, yeah, that's right round at the extreme there, we'll just move that. I want to make sure that the cord moves smoothly all the way through its range. It's quite a bit of tension on that cord. Okay. I'll just nudge that cord down to, that's the rear one, I want to nudge that down towards the bottom. I'll just take the tension off that, nudge that knot down. Alright, that feels pretty good. I think that'll be fine. And with the drum in that position, so that I'll prop this up so you can see. With the cord in the front position here, runs down to the bottom of the pulley. It runs around the bottom of the pulley and back up to this point. So the knot comes in at this point. That's about where you want it to be. Now with the slot in the front here, at about the 11 o'clock position like that, our meter drum at the top should be facing somewhere midline of the camera like that. Now that's a good place to start. At that point everything should run to its full range of movement. So that's the meter cords all in place. It's the meter cords all in place now for these three cameras, and that's one of the trickiest parts of the process, getting those meters correctly positioned. We're not done yet because we have to get the cord locked into the drum. That's a problem all of its own, but we're not at that stage yet.